So students, this is part two of the packet and information on the late 20th century, early 21st century. Here's some questions that I want you to answer. And you can listen to part one of the presentation to answer questions 1 through 8. I'm going to read these questions to you. It says, number one, what Supreme Court case in 1954 ruled that segregation of public schools was unconstitutional? Number two, during what event did Martin Luther King deliver his I Have a Dream speech? Number three, how many years before the Voting Rights Act did the Montgomery bus boycott happen? 3, it says, refused to give up seat to a white passenger, was arrested for not sitting in the colored section of a bus, and sparked the Montgomery bus boycott. These clues depict what individual? Number 5, describe the actions of the 4 college students from the North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University did to protest Jim Crow. Number 6, you see a sign that says white waiting room only. What legislation would ban this sign? Number 7, what organization was founded in 1966 dedicated to making legal, political, social, and economic changes to eliminate sexism? Sexism means that you are against people of a certain gender. 8, what did the Voting Rights Act in 1965 ban? So once again, you can listen to part 1 of the audio to do questions 1 through 8 if you don't remember. Here's a picture of the 4 students at Woolworth's counter, the lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. This is a sit-in, and this was an action done by people during the Civil Rights Movement to protest unfair treatment under the Jim Crow laws. 4 brave college students. It says the Civil Rights Movement resulted in legislation that ensured constitutional rights to all citizens of the United States, regardless of race. And this is just a review of the 2 major legislative acts, I should say, that turned the tide in African Americans and other groups gaining equality and ending discriminatory practices. We have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It is considered one of the crowning legislative achievements of the Civil Rights Movement. And then you have the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 bans racial discrimination in voting practices by the federal government as well as by state and local government. And here's some pictures of people having protests in these 2 pictures up here. This picture is of a sit-in of the 4 black college students from North Carolina A&T at Woolworth's, which was a department store. And this is Rosa Parks being arrested. She's being booked for violating Jim Crow laws because she refused to give her seat to a white passenger. And she sparked the Montgomery bus boycott in Alabama, which was an economic strain on the bus companies in the city of Montgomery. And this happened all across the South. So she was a trailblazer. Here's some Brain Pop videos for you to look at and take a quiz on them. Martin Luther King Jr., Feminism, Brown versus Board of Education, Malcolm X, Jackie Robinson. Here's an activity I would like for you to do. So you'll need to number your paper from 1 to 6. It says, read each description, determine what feature of the Civil Rights Act does it go against. For the second column, write whether discrimination is happening in a public facility or a place of employment. Place of employment means where somebody works. Public facility may be a restaurant, might be a pool, maybe a theater, it may be a bus station, anything that serves the public. And also, you need to determine the reason the violation is happening. Is it because of race, their religion, sex or gender, national origin, or color? All right, the description or scenario for number 1 says, the YMCA tells a group of white children that they cannot swim in their swimming pool because it is only for black children. Number 2, a department store clerk asks only Muslim customers for identification when purchasing with a credit card. And people who are Muslim practice the religion of Islam, by the way. Number 3, at Ruby Tuesday, a waiter purposely waits an hour in serving a family with a Mexican background their food, while white and black families wait only 15 minutes to be served. 4, a theater manager tells Amy she has to sit in the balcony areas because she is African American. 5, it says, I'm going to hire the best person for my company, but they must be a woman. Number 6, it says the United States Postal Service decides to pay women only $7.50 an hour while paying men $9 an hour for the same amount of work. So again, for each of these scenarios, you have to put where the discrimination is happening. Is it happening in a public facility, or is it happening on the job, which is the place of employment? And for what reason are they being violated? What reason are they being discriminated against? Is it because of their race, their religion, their sex, national origin, or color? National origin means the country from where your ancestors came from, or your background, your heritage is from. All right, this slide says Civil Rights Movement, double column notes and questions. Kids, this is pretty simple. You're reading the notes and you're answering questions 1 through 8. So you'll need to number your paper from 1 to 8 and answer these simple questions. Even a caveman can do it. I'm going to read from top to bottom. It says opposition to Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled that separate facilities were good as long as they were equal. And that pretty much wasn't the case for over almost 100 years. Homer Plessy was a man, African American, who sat in a whites-only cart on a train, and he refused to move. And he challenged it, and he took it all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court in 1896 ruled that separate but equal. They had a right to discriminate against you, but as long as they're equal facilities. And we know that in previous slides I showed you, segregation was not fair. It was not equal. Then it says Brown versus Board of Education, desegregation of schools. That was a Supreme Court case that was the opposite, that overturned Plessy versus Ferguson. Then it says Martin Luther King, passive resistance against the segregated facilities. I Have a Dream speech. Next one says Rosa Parks, she sparked the Montgomery's bus boycott and organized protests, freedom riders, sit-ins, and marches. Those were actions and methods that people did to carry out the fight for civil rights. Organized protests, freedom riders, sit-ins, and marches. The freedom riders went down south in buses, and their goal was to integrate the bus terminals. And this was a dangerous task to do because you had people who were very mean and had very evil and cruel racist beliefs. And many freedom riders were attacked. Many buses were set on fire. Even some people were killed. So you had to be very brave to challenge Jim Crow laws, particularly if you're a freedom rider. There were a lot of marches in Selma, marches in Atlanta, marches in Montgomery, marches all over the country, even marches in Lynchburg, in Richmond, to protest against the unfairness of Jim Crow. Then it says expansion of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, That was a civil rights organization formed in I believe 1909, and that provided legal counsel and legal aid to individuals, minority groups, and businesses who felt like they were being discriminated against in aspects of government, also when they went into public facilities and private businesses. So the NAACP is still around. Then you had the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We talked about how that banned discrimination in public places and public facilities nationwide. And then the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which banned discrimination not only at the federal level, but also at the state and local level. You can't have these policies and acts that say you can't vote because you're black. You can't vote because you're white. You can't do that. You have to treat everybody the same. And go ahead and answer these questions 1 through 8. The first question says, what Supreme Court case were supporters of the Civil Rights Movement opposed to? Why do you think they were opposed to it? Number 2, what Supreme Court case said that all public schools had to be mixed with different races and colors? 3, in what speech did Martin Luther King call for passive resistance against segregated facilities? Number 4, what famous lady refused to give her seat to a white man? What did this lead to? 5, describe the different methods used by supporters to promote civil rights. 6, if you were a person of color, what organization would advocate for you to be treated equally and fairly? Number 7, when was the Civil Rights Act passed? Number 8, when was the Voting Rights Act passed? I want to point out that the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act was a remedy to the failure of southern states protecting the voting and civil rights of African Americans. We learned that during Reconstruction, all the rights that African Americans had gained were lost through Jim Crow laws. You had literacy tests, you had poll taxes, you had a lot of acts of intimidation throughout the end of Reconstruction up into the 1960s that pretty much made it okay to treat people differently because of the color of their skin, or to not let people vote because of the color of their skin. And that was okay, and our country ignored that. But a lot of brave men and women, a lot of people in the religious community, a lot of people in churches, white people and black people say, hey, this is wrong. We need to make our country greater. Our country needs to be equal and fair towards everybody, and this is wrong. And so that's why we need the Civil Rights Act, and that's why these 2 laws were passed and signed into law by Lyndon B. Johnson, who's the President of the United States during the Civil Rights Movement, particularly around the time period when African Americans gained civil rights, also when women gained equal rights, and also Native Americans. So this is a wrap for part 2, and please answer these questions, and talk to you later. Bye-bye.